Hi, thank you. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. Actually, I always like them to do it because I've been in positions where my bios they sort of pulled out maybe some things that aren't quite the way I'd like to present them. So I like having the panelists introduce themselves. Again, just a quick background on myself. Women 2.0 is a company I acquired last year out of Silicon Valley. It's an international media at the center. We create solutions, ideally, tech-backed, scalable, that just start hammering away at the gender gaps in the tech space. So I am originally from here, lived in Boston for about 10 years, and chose to come back here, and am now pulled this company out of Silicon Valley and have it sort of headquartered here and looking to grow it here. So that's a bit about my background. Part of what we want to get to, can I ask the audience, who's originally from here, number one? Ooh, not quite as many as I thought. And of you who are originally from here, who left for a bit of time and then came back? Okay, almost equal. Of course, everyone on our panel should be responding to that one. So part of what we want to do is, yes, we're going to walk through our own stories and some of the reasons that we left, came back, whys, the hurdles, the pros, the cons. Part of what we want you to be keeping in your mind is that one of our big, sort of regional goals with many of the people in this audience and whom they work for is to be trying to make this upstate New York an attractive place for people to be relocating, but also coming back to. So if you have in your networks expats and I'll be referring to expats, so those are Central New York folks who now have left and are elsewhere. Any who might be having the inkling to come back, hopefully from this panel we'll be able to pull some nuggets as maybe conversation starters or some of the things that you might be able to equip to have some of those conversations. Without further ado, I'm going to start with Mike Quigley. He is the founder of SpinCar. Mike?
Thank you, Kate. And yeah, first of all, I just wanted to thank UVC for putting on this event. It just keeps getting better year over year. Really excited to be here. So again, I'm Mike Quigley, co-founder and president of SpinCar. We are a 360 imaging and VR company focused in the automotive sector. We make it easier for dealerships and auto manufacturers to display their inventory online in a highly transparent manner, which ultimately drives sales. We are now headquartered just down the road on Warren Street in Icon Tower. I was from Syracuse originally. Started the company with a fellow from high school, Christian Brothers Academy, where we went to locally here. Left Syracuse, was down at NYU in college, and then shortly thereafter co-founded SpinCar, entered the StartFast venture accelerator, and never looked back. We moved back to Syracuse, and we can sort of delve into later why that occurred, but it's been a great decision for us, and it's been going super well.
Hi. Hi, Garrett Bastable. Thanks to Kate for moderating and for Nasser for inviting me. So I lead operations at a company called Density. At Density, we make a small sensor that goes on an entryway and tells you how busy a space is. So with our sensor, which is going to be on the market very shortly, we could tell you exactly how many people are in this room right now anonymously, and you can imagine what else you might do with that. I moved back just under a year ago, so this month, last year, from San Francisco. Prior to Density, I worked at Apple for 8 years. The last project I worked on at Apple was leading new product operations for the Apple Watch. And yeah, I grew up here. We actually went to high school together at FM, and came back for myriad reasons, which I think we'll discuss today.
Martin Babinec. My story is having grown up in the Mohawk Valley, which is about an hour east of here. And after college, worked for the Navy as a civilian for about 11 years, and last assignment happened to be in the San Francisco Bay Area. And since I had worked for the government too long and no one would hire me because I had that good for government use only label stamped on my forehead, I ended up having to start a company. That company is TriNet, and that journey began 29 years ago. TriNet handles all the headaches of being an employer, with all of the things involving insurance, payroll, all kinds of benefits, all kinds of compliance, both with systems and also with a lot of expertise. Today, we're a public company and have about 15,000 customers around the U.S. That collectively employ about 350,000 employees, making us the 6th largest private employer in the U.S. The journey includes my having moved family from Silicon Valley, where we started the company, back to upstate New York in 1999. And I thought I'd be commuting cross country for just a couple of years, but didn't quite work out that way because of the dot-bomb in the early part of 2000. And as a result of continuing that commute until 2010, I spent a lot of time thinking about what does it take to really change the dynamics of this region, and then started Upstate Venture Connect, which is a nonprofit, and we continue that journey of connecting first-time entrepreneurs to the resources that can help them region-wide. So my reason for moving back was not business reasons, but it was really related to personal reasons, and we'll touch on that over the course of the discussion.
Great, thanks, Martin. And that actually leads us into our first question is, what were some of the main choices that you guys, or thought processes that you went through, of course including pros and cons, that made you actually come back to the central New York area? And I know each of you have different reasons, and some of them involve business, personal, that sort of thing. Also, too, if you know of anybody who've moved back, any colleagues, throwing in some of those, but just sort of that thought process, because it's a big thought process, especially moving for two of you from Silicon Valley out here back. So, Mike, I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, it was definitely business reasons, and I have to say that, I mean, the pros of moving back here definitely outweighed what few, if any, cons I think there were. So this was in 2012, 13 or so. We had just wrapped up StartFast, had raised a slug of capital, and we're looking to go to market and scale our sales team. And we had to take a hard look. We were working in New York City, in the Flatiron neighborhood at that point in time. We had been focused on the fashion sector, but this was sort of as the automotive pivot was occurring for our business, and we had to just take a hard look at what it was going to cost to hire like a 20-person sales team. And looking at doing that in Midtown Manhattan versus Syracuse, New York, I mean, it became a very clear economic decision where you could do more and do it faster. And from a access to talent standpoint, too, I mean, we're used to competing for interns even down in the city, whereas up here there's just a tremendous talent pool to draw from, not just in sales, but in account management, operations. And that was really the driver for us. Talent and just general cost of living and quality of life was just so much better up here.
Great. And Garrett, when you talk about this, a bit of background for those of you who don't know, Density, the company that Garrett now works for, is actually originally based out of Syracuse. It's the old Rounded. They're in the Tech Garden. And Garrett actually met the CEO, who is now located in San Francisco, out in San Francisco. So I did just want to throw in a little bit of background on that, but Garrett?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So when I was at Apple for the 8 years I was there, it became obvious I was either going to have to commit to the Bay Area and the cost of living and all the challenges there, or look elsewhere. And everyone that I knew, all my family, friends, were in the East Coast. And so for me, it started as a personal decision, and then became a myriad of other decisions, the business one being one of them. So I met Andrew Farah, our CEO, out in San Francisco. In fact, I was looking for a way back here, and I met him, and I said, oh, I'm not going to be back until Thanksgiving. And he said, well, I'm in San Francisco, and turns out we were 8 blocks from each other, and the rest was kind of history. And then he and I stood up our office out there, and now I commute back and forth. So I just got back from San Francisco on Saturday. The reasons on the business side are, as Kate said, we were founded here in the Tech Garden, and perhaps we'll get to this, but it turns out that there's any of the concerns on available talent or resources I found are not really the case. In fact, quite the opposite. We have exceptional resources here, exceptional access to talent, and so we're growing the company kind of on 2 coasts. We have got about 50% of the team on the West Coast and about 50% here on the East Coast, and that's actively growing. So yeah, on the personal side and on the business side, reasons to come back.
Great. Martin, I know Martin is a nice framework to work on this one.
Well, as I mentioned, I really came here not for business reasons, but for personal reasons. And when I think of personal reasons that people would consider moving back, they probably fall into 3 different categories. Family, the opportunity to have an impact, and we frame that in different ways, and quality of life. So I was born and raised in Little Falls and have an extended family there. My wife, Krista, is from Auburn, not far away, so family was probably at the top of our list. Quality of life means a lot of different things to different people, whether we look at arts, recreation, the quality of our local education systems. Quality of life comes in a lot of different flavors, but that's another whole category. But scope of impact maybe is something that I'll touch on from my standpoint. When you're in a large metropolitan area where it's a big pond, and there's a lot of fish swimming in it, it's actually harder to have big impact because there is a lot of fish swimming around in the pond. And when we think about upstate New York, where there's a lot of opportunity, in some ways, you really have the chance to be that big fish in a smaller pond, and the opportunity to have an impact, I would argue, is a lot better here than in any of the major metropolitan areas. So as we think about who do we know out there that has some personal reasons, be it family, quality of life, that have already got their attention, being able to focus on scope of impact and the people that we want to rejoin our community are those that want to have an impact, and the opportunities to have an impact here in upstate New York are really substantial.
Yeah, that's great. I know one of the reasons I could have left Women 2.0 in Silicon Valley, and but one of the big things is I wanted to actually have the business that will hopefully grow into an enormous take over the world business. I wanted to have that here and give some job opportunities locally and have my taxes go locally and try to pull in some of the private funding I get locally and all that stuff. So quick roundtable on that. As you're thinking about some of the things that you developed in your expat days, and then now you've come back, what do you think some of those key pieces of your expat days that you essentially brought back here have really been huge benefits to being able to then sort of function from a business standpoint here in Central New York? Mike?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for me, I wasn't away that long. I mean, it was honestly sort of the 4 years of college, but I mean, I think the takeaway for me was living in New York. I mean, inherently, living in New York City, it's a complex and kind of cacophonous experience, and I think that's a great foundation to build on being an entrepreneur. I mean, naturally, there's tons of distractions. Starting a company, you're being pulled in a million different directions, and I think any opportunity that someone has to sort of be in an uncomfortable position, maybe it's living abroad or in a super dense urban environment like Manhattan. I mean, anything to pull you out of your comfort zone, I think, is a great foundation for entrepreneurship. So that's my take.
Garrett?
Yeah, so in my experience, it varied. You talked about the Navy. I was actually an officer in the Navy, so I bounced around the world, but the majority of my kind of growth, I think, happened at Apple, and the reality is that some of the greatest companies years and years and years ago based themselves there. I think today we're hopefully seeing some of that happen here in upstate New York, but that was the opportunity available, and I wanted to pick the best hardware company I could find and learn as much as I could. And now that I have that experience, I feel well poised to bring it back here, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to build a complex hardware software company, and so it's really that deep experience in Silicon Valley that then I can hopefully transport back here and hire people and train and grow the company from that background, that perspective.
Martin?
I think about experience, perspective, and relationships. And experience for me that really helped a lot was scaling up a business, because starting a business is one thing, but being able to scale a business up, both in volume and headcount. I got it to the first 100 million. I was a CEO for 20 years, first 20 years of TriNet. and raised lots of capital. But scaling a business with a team, and especially going through the iterations for sales and marketing, was an important experience that I try to share with others. Perspective, one thing of perspective that I really value from having really been lucky to have started my company in Silicon Valley is the importance of pay it forward. Because the juice that makes Silicon Valley work, that is often underappreciated, is that successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, when they exit their companies, they're out there helping the next generation. I was the beneficiary of that, and I tell people all the time, had I not been the beneficiary of that, I would have not been able to develop a company as I did. And so that's a perspective I bring back, and I try to do all I can to have others understand that and carry that forward, pay it forward. Not worrying so much about, do I really know someone so well that I will only help those people that I already know and trust? No, it's like pay it forward means helping others even when you don't even know them that well. That's the Silicon Valley ethos from a perspective standpoint that's important. And lastly, relationships. The more we advance through our career, the more relationships that we can build over time across multiple geographies. And we can bring those relationships to help others that we're working with here in upstate New York, no matter where those relationships might lie, those things are pretty valuable.
Great. Yeah, that last point, what I tell people hands down when I'm asked that question is my network. The network that I developed in 10 years outside and doing sort of global work. I can easily, I was on the phone with Singapore yesterday morning, and it's so easy to do now. Pulling that relationships and pulling those in back to Central New York has essentially made it seamless for me, and I'm able to do a ton of business outside of, actually I do probably 99% of our business is outside of Central New York. Going to change that, don't worry. Okay, great. Let's talk about myth busting. So when we think about upstate New York, when we think about doing business in upstate New York, what are some of the myths out there? They could be from expats, they could be in this room for people thinking about it. What do we need to address on that realm?
I think that the talent myth is one that we've all touched on already. It's not a problem, and it's really silly to think it is. With all the universities right in our backyard, recruiting is just not a problem for us. We're doubling our headcount year over year. We've done that for the last 3 years, and hiring has never been a problem. And honestly, recruiting people from outside of the community has never been a problem. We just recruited a chief product officer from Orange County last week. Our VP of sales is from.
And did they relocate, Mike?
And he relocated, yeah, his whole family to Syracuse. Similarly, our VP of sales was from the Atlanta area. These are people that are living in places that typically you'd think no one in their right mind could be convinced to come back to Syracuse. And these aren't people who have roots in Syracuse even. But it just goes to show if you're building something that's exciting and people can recognize the value that Syracuse has and are comfortable and excited to move here.
Great.
Yeah, so I think work is only part of it. We talked about the personal side as well. My belief is people just don't understand or appreciate this area until they're here. So I try to take people when they visit, especially coworkers, I try to convince them to come up to the St. Lawrence River where I have a summer cottage and see how beautiful this area is and how compelling it is to live here, because you not only do you obviously have your job and you want to work and do that, you want to have a personal life and enjoy where you're living. So I think there's this idea that it's a cold, snowy place and that's it, and that's obviously not true if you look out today. The talent piece is absolutely one of them. I think it's even convincing people who've come from here sometimes that there are a huge amount of resources. I heard a gentleman earlier mention about photonics. We actually work with photonics, and it turns out Rochester is incredible for that, and probably the best in the world. And so it took a couple of years before we actually drove to Rochester to meet with a photonics company and said, "Holy cow, this is right here." And so, yeah, I think once you start to hire and try to attract talent, then you realize how great the talent is here and not necessarily known. So sometimes it's just a matter of actually doing that, and through doing that, any myth around access to talent goes away. So,
Martin?
Well, I echo what has been said, that the talent is here, but if I put my scale-up hat on, I'll also acknowledge that when it comes to certain higher level management positions that have been in a rapidly scaling environment, that's our weakest talent link, because the talent that we need with people that have really been there and done that, and now we're talking like north of $50 million and rapidly rising, that's the talent pool in a place like Silicon Valley or New York City or Boston, that the abundance of people with that very specialized managerial and sales talent both, those are the two biggies, that we still have to work really hard at. So if I put my lens on that particular section of talent and realize what do we as upstate New York, recognizing that's a vulnerable area in our talent pool, what can we do? Reminding people that, hey, the expat community is part of that, because there are people that appreciate our quality of life. And we come across people, even in our travels for Upstate Venture Connect, where Nasser and I and Kate, when we're out and about in these other areas in San Francisco and Boston, et cetera, we're always like identifying where are some upstate expatriates that maybe we can warm them up a little bit and remind them of what's going on here. Because they're a big stumbling block for the people that are most in demand and are making like really, really high levels of compensation now. They have to be kind of coaxed out. The people that are receptive are those that already express a little bit of envy for some of our high quality of life that we have here, and maybe the desire to, if they have young children and they're thinking about their next generation, that's a point of vulnerability that with the right amount of coaxing and we give them some exposure, we can remind them of opportunities that we can change their priorities. And that's something that requires dialogue. So those people are out there, they're receptive, and they need to be nurtured. And that's something all of us can help with.
Great. I want to push the talent side a bit more. Martin, I know you just mentioned sales and management talent as being a weakness. I know in my background too, we've talked a lot about tech talent as well. I have a husband who's a former startup developer out of Boston, and when I dragged him back here, basically he had a really, really hard time finding a job. Now he's a hops farmer. He loves it. But that's always been something we talk a lot about. Do you guys what's your experience been with tech talent? I know we've got a couple people here who have to definitely deal with it.
Tech talent is, an area that we've had success in. It is probably the one area that's a little bit more challenging for us. We've had, interns from RIT and Cornell. I think maybe one or two of them are actually in the audience here today now who have actually gone on to start their own companies. But it's, those folks are in high demand themselves and can easily get recruited away down to the city of Silicon Valley. For that reason, we do maintain a small satellite office down in New York, which is where our tech team operates out of. But I think it's getting better, and increasingly product management type folks are in the market up here, and I think that's sort of a leading indicator for tech talent too, starting to become more readily available in an area. So I think the message is it's getting better, and if it is really as much of a challenge for you as it was in our early days, ultimately Manhattan's a 49-minute plane flight away. So, yeah.
So for us, a huge component of density is our software, cloud infrastructure, and machine learning algorithm. And it turns out that we've been able to grow and have the majority of our software team right in the tech garden across the street. So while we do have a contingent on the West Coast, that's largely operations and some hardware engineering, but we found and have recently hired and are hiring actively, even as of this week, we're trying to hire someone here in Syracuse for the software, cloud infrastructure, and machine learning algorithm teams. So I think, again, we just going out and doing it demonstrates that it's possible, and any myths or concerns around talent kind of melt away when you see how amazing these people are, how talented they are, and they're literally across the street from Hotel Syracuse here. So.
Yeah.
I would absolutely echo that the evidence is there from my standpoint, because I'm active and out there in the community, and we can see companies being able to fill the tech talent roles that they need to have filled. As a community, what we need to do more of is shine a spotlight on more of these companies actually doing it, because that helps the disbelievers start to change their opinions over time. And it's a reminder to follow on Nasser's earlier request for us to get more of these high-growth companies into our CEO survey, because then we'll have the data. So it's not just anecdotal experience, but we need the data, which, by the way, the media will be willing to publish it more the deeper the data set is, because all these things help play on the awareness that we do have the intellectual capital here. And I'll tell you, when you're in Silicon Valley trying to hire, let's say, a software developer, do you know what the average cost is? You know, you want to speak to that, Garrett? What is the average cost when you're trying to hire at Density a person with just journeyman level web development skills, all right?
So I'm probably not going to quote a specific number. What I would tell you, though, is that to your point, Martin, the talent is here, and it's affordable. And if you're trying to start a company, especially when you're pre-revenue, being able to afford that the talent, and frankly, people here, I think, are in many cases happier. The Valley creates a pretty unique environment, and especially if you're in some of those roles, it's not always the healthiest. And I think everyone on our team that is in Syracuse seems really, really happy with the office and the area they work. And we often talk about that as a company. You know, how do we replicate some of what we have in Syracuse elsewhere in the country?
Yeah, and one thing I don't know, we don't have to talk about exact numbers, but one of the things that I know I had seen at least a couple of years ago was that some of the salary offerings for tech roles also were not, necessarily the most attractive, even from a local standpoint. But I think what I'm hearing you say, it's probably that at least has come up to the point. Of course, again, it's affordable, but it also has to be at that nice, and for any salary that we're talking about for any position, is that not only just affordable, but also has to be attractive enough that it will overcome, a New York City salary, or a Silicon Valley salary, or something like that, where maybe maybe those salary sizes are a little bit bigger. So, but I would probably say that you guys have found that you can get that sweet spot in there where it's enough to stay, but also beneficial for you to run your company. Yeah, great.
Try buying a house in San Francisco.
Oh God, that's part of the reason that the salaries are so high. We actually run a small side note. We actually run a recruitment platform for female technologists, and we threw up a senior software development role last week. Salary $150K to $170K plus a 12% bonus every year, and we actually got people saying, well, geez, that's actually not that high because actually my apartment, blah, 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 blah. So you can see the huge disparity in just being able to survive out there with the entire picture. So I want to chat. We just talked a bit, Martin, you alluded to this just a little bit with sort of thinking about families and that sort of thing. How do you think we can identify some of those expats out there that could be receptive to coming back? Have you noticed any traits or anything like that? And Martin, why don't we have you start on this one?
I begin by asking questions, like when we're out there on the road and I identify somebody that has upstate New York roots, whether they grew up here or went to school here, and I ask them, about their life and, what things do they like about wherever they are and what do they think about the upstate New York area. And I always look for them to volunteer where might be an opportunity. Because I'm a sales guy by background, so, this is what we do. We ask questions.
Look for the holes.
Yeah, look for the holes and then work to develop it, because each person's story and their interest will be different.
Great. Garrett?
So you're talking about getting back, bringing people that have left the area, gone around the country, and then pulling them back into why return home effectively, or in some cases.
What might be a good profile of somebody? So Martin had mentioned one of probably the more common things that you see is someone thinking about, okay, now I have to start thinking about daycares, or when they see the size of house with 4 acres that they can get for the same amount of money as their 600 square foot apartment or something like that. those types of things. So those are on the personal side, but what are maybe some of those profiles of some expats who are on the more willing side to think about coming back?
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to take the low-hanging fruit, which is myself, and because, so 5 years ago, I was probably a pretty unlikely candidate to end up back here. And a year ago, I made the leap, and what got me there is, well, we were talking about properties, so I lived in an 800 square foot apartment in San Francisco, and I said, how long am I gonna do this? And to your point here, you can have a property, you can have a dog. We talked about the ability to actually have a family and have pets and other things that seem so easy and obvious to everyone who's probably in this room and lives in this area, but not so much if you're in a New York City or Boston or wherever it may be. So I think trying to identify people like myself, and one person we were talking about earlier she works over at Center State CEO, and every time I'd come home for the holidays, she would say to me, so when are you moving back? So when are you moving back? There's all these great things here. And I think more of that, I mean, talking about avenues to attract people, people naturally come back here or maybe visit here, and having the opportunity to catch them at those holidays, at those high school reunion type events, or even on social media. I mean, I think our high school has a huge Facebook page, and just saying, hey, here's the job offerings, here are the job listings, and I mean, that's definitely the first foot in the door, but when they realize all the other benefits, I think it's a tipping point, and that's what it was for me.
I need to maybe point out, one of the biggest obstacles for people that are really in demand and are already making a lot of money in some of these other areas, even if they found an opportunity here, what goes through their mind is, suppose I take this job with a promising company in upstate New York, and I've relocated now at great risk because I'm taking a risk that maybe this company doesn't make it, all right? Is there going to be another job available if this one doesn't work out? That's a subtext that sometimes has to be addressed, and part of what we can do to make them comfortable in overcoming that particular hurdle is spreading awareness that we're building a connected community. And this audience here today reflects that, as we have people from Hudson Valley, Mohawk Valley, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, Ithaca, Binghamton, Capital District. And so as a result of our bridging this geography and getting people connected, we're increasing the likelihood that someone that maybe starts with one company and doesn't make it can actually get connected to other opportunities, because these opportunities are here, but they haven't been visible enough across the entire geography, and we're getting better.
Yeah, that's one of the things I always, one of the holes I always try to fill is simply sort of the level of, and you can put it in a bunch of different ways, but whether it's brain power, the level of the people with an incredible level of experience and quite impressive, and some, you know, you just look at, I'm out in Cazenovia, and you just look at in Cazenovia the profiles of people, and they have done absolutely remarkable things. They've been in the center of the White House. They have run enormous companies. You know, they're president of billions of companies and that sort of thing. And having to talk to people about, okay, you're pulling yourself out of what is normally a highly charged, highly networked location often. I came from the startup world right in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it was very difficult for me to think about coming back here and understanding how I was going to sort of get that. And that's one of the big holes I've filled too, is that no, there is actually a pretty big network here. I think a lot of us have talked about, again, Martin, how to make that a bit more visible and bring it up so that it is actually a pretty visible asset, which is, you know, that's sort of got to put some tangibility to that. But that is one hole I know I've filled often, is that just the realization of what the incredible profiles of people are in central New York. And it's a lot more than just sort of the, well, no one ever leaves Syracuse and whoever goes type of thing that you might have when you leave in your 20s. I'll admit I did have that for a couple years. Great, we have just a few more minutes. We've touched on it, but I want to do quick round of, I feel like my microphone just went way up. 2 to 3 of your top reasons. If someone said, hey, I'm thinking of relocating, or I'm not thinking about relocating, I'm gonna narrow this down. Top 2 reasons for coming back.
Let's see, cost of living, quality of life, SU basketball.
Yeah, I
Garrett.
think cost of living's got to be at the top of that list, and just great people to work with, great network, great area to be.
Great.
Opportunity to have my kids know their extended family and their grandparents, quality of life, and the opportunity to have an impact.
Great. Thank you very much.